Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
So, in this lecture, lecture 13, we will be discussing limits and legacies of colonial urbanization. So, the concepts that will be covered in this lecture, or the route map that this lecture will follow. So, the discussion would mainly surround relating to the limits and legacies of colonial urban environmental planning, and so we will this lecture would demonstrate how spatio-social inequities actually got entrenched as part of the colonial urbanization or urbanizing processes, and how slums and squatters were demolished and people were dehoused, they were evicted, displaced without proper rehabilitation and alternative housing facilities, and how there was also like a lot of discrepancies in terms of official projection and actually what was taking place at the ground level. So, and also one needs to remember that today we discuss beautification projects and its impact on on the lives and livelihoods of the marginal section, the urban poor, and this is an important it's the crux of the urban political ecology literature. But I think like if we apply the urban environmental history perspective, we can understand that how the colonizers also for example, Bombay or Calcutta as important imperial cities. So, as centers of as important centers of commerce, how the colonial urban imageries were also getting shaped with this idea of imperial power and imperial centers so far as commerce was concerned. So, I mean the state was also interested to flush out filth, and not only filth, but also to flush out dirty people, quote unquote dirty people. So, how like colonial urban imageries were kind of crafted with this particular idea in mind. And so far as like several other limitations of colonial urbanization are concerned, I think one major limit was these continuous frictions among multiple actors and agencies, and these has an enduring legacy on contemporary urbanization. We have these continuous frictions and no coordination, or rather lack of coordination among multiple actors, sectors and agencies. It's still a very significant feature of the Indian urbanization process. Yes, so to start with, the students from literature or from history, they very much know these terms, they are familiar with terms like black town and white town, and this black town and white town definitely this nomenclature signify that they are like colonial constructs, and historians have worked on the emergence of black towns and white towns, and the differences between these towns in terms of access to infrastructures, in terms of protection, in terms of fortification, etc. So, for example, the first British cities like Madras 1644, Bombay 1661 and Calcutta 1690. So, all these were these were fort cities and port cities, because like the inner core, it consisted of fort or a fortified settlement which was strongly controlled, and this was like designed and dominated and occupied by the British, and this area or this space was known as civil line, and this was kind of bounded by the cantonment area where the British troops were accommodated, and then surrounding the core, the area where the native people settle, that area known as the native or the black town actually sprang up. So, this was the kind of the layout or the urban fabric, and Kumar, who has worked on the Madras urban planning in Madras, he says that the black and white towns were colonial constructs and they emerged as products of racial and colonial division. Yes, no doubt about this. And Spodek, we talked about Spodek in our last lecture also. So, Spodek specializing on city planning in India during the British times. So, he says that as British control extended across India in the 18th and 19th centuries and encompassed many already existing cities, these patterns of spatial segregation by nationality and race were repeated. So, for example, other modes of urban plan or architecture are also evident so far as colonial cities are concerned. So, for example, very large areas of cantonment and civil lines alongside pre-existing Indian cities, we find these areas, and the examples include New Delhi, Bangalore, Secunderabad adjoining Hyderabad. And there was also the creation of residency areas. So, residency areas, so in the capitals of India's large princely states and in the center of regions with numerous smaller princely states, the British, they created the residency areas as headquarters to run local administration. So, and also troops were garrisoned, troops were accommodated in these residency areas. So, you can see some images here of the residency areas from where local administration was run and garrison, troops were garrisoned. Now, a lot of literature, as I told you, on spatial segregation, on this evolution of concurrent evolution of white and black towns. So, for example, historians focusing on late 18th and 19th century urban history, they had actually talked about this spatial and morphological distinction between white towns and black towns. But there is also recent literature that talks about how white towns and black towns should not actually be understood as sacrosanct categories. So, the boundaries somewhere get blurred, and so white town should not be understood as a space or rather a homogeneous space only inhabited by Europeans. So, there are strong records show that there were strong features of colonial native interactions, right, even within fort areas. And if you see this table, so this table also speak of colonial native habitation even within the fort area. So, this is from the Bombay fort area. So, there are, if you weave the snippets that we get from records together, you will find interactions, negotiations and resistance between the Raj and the native. For example, there is one record that talks about like when in long back, like in 1800, when the British asked the Indian businessmen to evacuate or to vacate the fort area, how they actually resisted. And during that time, the British actually did not have any legal tool or legal means to kind of to put pressure on the Indian businessmen. So, we have these interesting stories of interactions, negotiations and resistance continuously going on, which went on between the native and the colonizers. So, I continue with this argument of overlapping geographies or blurred boundaries between white towns and black towns. The historians who had worked on white town, black towns, they argue that the most significant feature that actually distinguished the black town from the white town was that actually the density of the urban fabric. So, on one hand, like sparsely populated and sparsely dense houses of the white town against the close knit urban fabric of the black town. So, but as I talked about Chattopadhyay and her article specifically focusing on Kolkata, and she talks about these blurring boundaries, and the name of the article itself is Blurring Boundaries, which came out in 2000, and there she says that boundaries were actually quite fluid. And she she kind of brings into in this article she talks about an interesting she she advances an interesting argument where she says that how the various terms or terminologies, Bengali native dialect or terminologies like para, tola, tuli, etc. So, they actually do not hint this white town black town duality. This para, tola, tuli do not address the duality evident in black town, evident in the spatial segregation between black town and white town. Rather for example, para is an area, or it was a space consisting of 1/4 by 1 mile, for example, which could be walked by foot, right. So, there is no legal bearing so far as these spatial categories were concerned, but these were cognitively constituted territories. So, it is quite important to also know the local terms or the native dialect which were used to kind of designate boundaries, which to a great extent like critically interrogates the so called sacrosanct white town, black town binaries or boundaries. Then the question is like what led to the emergence of this sacrosanct categorization. So, Chattopadhyay and before Chattopadhyay, even in Spodek's work, I think Spodek has talked about this categorization or this division, the root, its root can be found in the British desire to or the obsession to continue with classification, zoning, segregation, etc. And to a great extent this actually reflect the colonial zeal to protect islands of sociability and symbols of imperialism, sustaining an imperial narrative of difference in European society, superiority, sorry. So, the self and other, this is also very much evident in this kind of discourse. And also like this, I think this European superiority, this idea is also to a great extent it gets manifested in the castigation of the black town and the black or the native of the native and also the native space, the space where the native inhabited. And this is definitely connected with the story of like municipal indifference to these areas, leading to lack of access to infrastructures, henceforth like infrastructure inequity, slum demolition drives to suit or to kind of advance the colonial urban imageries relating to centers of imperial commerce like Bombay, Calcutta, etc. Yes, so not much has been written till date on ecological infrastructures of cities, though there is a lot of literature on hardware and software of cities. But again as I mentioned earlier that with urban environmental history becoming more and more prominent since the last 1.5 decade, I think this this domain or this research domain is actually now kind of emerging and emanating. So, we did a project 5 years back. So, in 2015 we did an ISSC International Social Science Council sponsored project, where we were actually studying water injustices in the 3 cities of the global south. So, Calcutta, India, Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, and Cochabamba, Bolivia. And so, we were actually trying to map the city by looking into the piped networks. So, which parts of the city were which part of the city the households got access to piped drinking water, and which part of the city or which wards actually remained unconnected. And like so, whether this is merely this could be understood by lack of availability, or this is only a technical story, or whether like power equations and political interest, vested interest also shaped this network infrastructure. So, this was a basic the major question that which we raised so far as this project on water injustice in the cities of the global south were concerned. So, what I did was that I was actually leading the Kolkata part of it, and what I did was that I being again a student of history and with long term interest in environmental history, I wanted to look into the what was going on in the city during the colonial times and since its inception. So, from record, and it was quite difficult and quite challenging. It was a tough job to get data so far as this particular domain was concerned, but then the data which I found from there, I could get some information, some facts. For example, that initially during the early decades of colonial rule, few ponds were only dug out in the central part of the city, which were inhabited by the whites. 12 rainwater harvesting ponds were excavated to supply potable water to the white settlers again, and also a social class called the Vishtis, who were water carriers. They played an important role in carrying water, and they went to this to the white houses, and so you can see the picture of a Vishti, and so they carried water, and these bags were made of goat skin. So, today there can be very interesting social history on this social class Vishtis themselves, and how the changing the changing economic and political dimensions and also environmental dimensions to a great extent it has influenced and determined the different occupations, including these water carriers. We do not have I think they are very few in number, because this job no more applies within the present context. So, anyway, in 1709 the great tank Lal Dighi in Dalhousie was constructed, which supplied water to Fort William, again the major center in Kolkata, the major administrative center, and between 1805 and 1836 numerous tanks were constructed again in the White Town. So, for example, in Cornwallis Square, College Square, Wellington Square, Wellesley Square, and rest of the city was, of course, it was not connected. Again, another very important history so far as the networked infrastructure, or so far as the history of potable water in the city of Kolkata is concerned, is the construction of the Polta water works. And why is it so important? Because Calcutta was the first Asian city to supply water through a pipeline, and that too in 1868. So, if you remember my previous lectures, we had discussed in detail that how in the 19th century itself, the European cities or the modern cities were getting connected to potable water. So, again, Kolkata establishing or getting its first water works established under the British rule in 1868 was a big thing, and that too from surface water resources. So, the Polta water works was constructed after detailed discussions and lot of brainstorming, and several plans were passed and lot of exchanges among multiple actors and agencies, and after elaborate set of official analysis of the water of the river. So, this was also, it definitely involved a very elaborate, detailed and rigorous technical design. And again, when I would discuss urban environmental history, so I would talk about how the discourse and practice of purity and pollution, it was created, and it is very much entrenched within the urban environmental fabric and rubric of the colonial city of Kolkata or Calcutta. So when this Polta water works was constructed, only 2,316 houses of total 16,000 houses had access to potable water. Unfortunately, this faulty distribution mechanism in terms of getting access to potable water, it continues till date. we are aware of Millennium Development Goals, we are aware of Sustainable Development Goals, and we are aware of the United Nations promise and target that how like clean water is the basic, I mean clean water should be should reach all the households, and I mean how it is one of our fundamental rights, but unfortunately in our water injustice project, when we were surveying different wards of Kolkata, forget about peri-urban parts, when we just also concentrated on the different wards within the KMC area, we found severe water inequity in terms of access to potable water. Like for example, the houses in the central areas or the central wards, each house get access to, or rather each person actually get access to 180 liters of drinking water per day, and in the slums I mean it is only 90 liters, like half, and in the pavements in some cases we found only it was 5 liters. So, like very very severe water inequity still present, and the faulty distribution mechanism is also an inherent characteristic of contemporary urbanization. Now, we discussed this improvement trusts. So, how did they perform? So, improvements for whom and at what cost? So, we know that how improvement trusts actually focused on physical planning, and their major objective was to improve poor living conditions through the development and construction of water sanitation facilities, widening of roads, and improvement of congestion, etc. So, lands were reclaimed for urban expansion and for making way to the urban development projects, but this also in turn led to slum clearance and slum demolition. And this is very very important that in 1894 this Land Acquisition Act was enacted, and this also remains a very significant or the principal tool in urban planning in contemporary India. So, there is a lot of debate surrounding this when smart cities were were discussed and smart cities were being constructed. So, for example, Aruna Datto has focused a lot on the inadequacies, the challenges, the impact of this act on the marginalized sections, and also like so for example, when this Dholera city was created, and also like for example Rajarhat. So, we know that how it actually led to slum clearance activities, and the promise during the colonial times, the promise that was conferred was that yes, housing projects will be built or housing projects will be implemented for low income groups, but we can see that when these houses came up, they were no more affordable by the low housing groups or the low income groups. At best they were only affordable by the middle income groups. So, this British improvement trusts, they remained to be unpopular symbols of the British rule. Yes, now if you go by numbers, you can see that there was some improvement in terms of displacing people and then constructing new houses for them, but then numbers also numbers or the quantification technique cannot explain or convey the truth, the actual reality. So, that is why I have like put the heading as the fallacy of numbers. So, like for example, let us take the example of the Bombay Improvement Trust. So, during the period during 1900s, 50,000 houses in slums, 50,000 people, they were dehoused, and only 2,844 houses were constructed or erected where the displaced people were kind of accommodated. So, you can see the difference in the number, and only 2,844 houses were erected so far as the so called quote unquote sanitary chawls were concerned, but then 1067 units were also constructed in police chawls or in semi permanent huts. Now, the number started improving in terms of demolition and construction, because in 1910s, just a decade later, we find that 7,823 people were dehoused and 9,311 houses were erected, but and also like by the end of 1932, 33,693 houses were demolished and 49,384 houses were constructed, of which 39,278 were of single room. But again, this, as I said, that this these statistics do not actually convey the real truth or the actual reality, because the rents seem to be too high, and also with as there was a whole lot of like obsession to create sanitary spaces. So, many houses were actually demolished to make way to large and big courtyards, so that ventilation, air, light, the areas remain spacious and airy and also like full of light, etc. But what happened is that the landlords, of course, they started building and constructing 2-storied or even sometimes 3-storied buildings. So, the outcome finally was actually overcrowding. And inflexible payment schedules, the people when they had to move to these new houses, they were not at all happy, because they now the payment schedule that they had to meet remain extremely inflexible, and as I told that it no more could be afforded by low income, but at best by middle income groups and communities. So, the improvement trust, if you take the example of BIT or CIT, Bombay Improvement Trust or Calcutta Improvement Trust, to a great extent they were failures, because there were conflicts over land, vested interests of multiple actors. Even like this is a quote from S. Clark, who was the governor of Bombay, and he says, so this has been his remark has been cited in Kidambi's work, and so he says that in the absence of any definite policy in the past, Bombay has been permitted to grow up almost haphazard. So, this the haphazard or unplanned growth of cities we actually owe back to the colonial period. So, Clark also he desperately urged for kind of a coordination among different sectors and agencies like the BIT, the Port Trust, the Railway Board, the Bombay Municipal Corporation, Mill Owners Association, Chamber of Commerce, but in vain. And so far as Calcutta is concerned, Calcutta also, like for example, this is a book by Richard and E.P. Richard, it is also known as the Richard Report. So, Richard, who was one of the major resource persons so far as this Calcutta Improvement Trust was concerned, he himself, like when he left India in 1914, he was so frustrated, and he himself like had such a bad health that he wrote and he submitted a 259 page report, and this is the report, so this has come out again in 2014 with an introduction by Richard Harris and Robert Levy. And if you go through this report, Richard's report, you will find that he talks about high rates of illness, disease, death, in Kolkata, and Kolkata was the city which had the highest percentage of slums in any city. Some demolition drives by the improvement trusts were also like Kolkata also visualized this slum clearance activities, because the logic was to provide adequate circulation of traffic and ventilation of air. So, of course, this era of improvement, it kind of conveys more declensionist narrative than positive stories or stories with optimism and hope, unfortunately. So, the another final limitation that of urban planning or colonial municipal governance, which I want to discuss here, is that is the frictions among multiple actors and agencies. So, for example, like when these improvement trusts were created, then key urban development powers, like powers to carry on key urban development projects remained at the hands of or given to the appointed officials by the improvement trust. But these appointed officials, then they in their activities they proceeded unencumbered by accountability to representatives of local self-governing institutions. So, these in turn created frictions and conflicts between elected municipal governments and appointed officials by trusts. So, multiplicity of authorities flooded the urban planning and development scene, and this has an enduring legacy so far as Indian contemporary urbanization or Indian contemporary urban scene is concerned. So, these are the references. Please go through Swati Chattopadhyay's work and also the report by Richards, Spodek's work definitely. So, yes, in this lecture we had covered or we had discussed the limits and legacies of colonial urban planning and development projects, and the constraints of colonial urbanization is manifested in British plans, urban architecture, power equations and networking of cities, and the vicissitudes evident in techno-legal processes and regulations. So, in a previous lecture we discussed the techno-legal processes and regulations, and in this lecture we had discussed the limitations and challenges that remain associated with these techno-legal processes and regulations. So, finally, the irony of urban improvement and its enduring legacies, it still till date it has an irreversible impact on the South Asian urban environmental fabric. And in our next lecture, when we discuss contemporary urbanization, first we would talk about the the urbanization processes and the various plans and agendas and missions in the immediate post-independent period during the Nehruvian regime, and then we move on to the more recent plans like JNNU RM and the most recent smart city program. We will see that how the limits that we have discussed now in this lecture, how some of the challenges, some of the inadequacies, some of the exclusions and major severe exclusions and the problems continue till date, and we have not been able to a great extent address some of these so called deep rooted irreversible challenges and constraints. So, thank you, and please go through all the references.